not, under any circumstances, I mean never, ever, never, ever, never, want to include me in doing anything like your taxes or anything that requires even a modicum of mathematical skill. I am not mathematical. My brain can't wrap around the simplest of equations. I am not a mathematician, and so you do not ever want to count on me to add up or help add up or divide, multiply, subtract. I think that's all the categories of math. You don't want to deal with me in math, just as a heads up. I am not a math person. I love history. I've always been, able to remember events and dates. I've been able to remember for example, the sort of history of the people of Israel and the Bible, world history, particularly American history. I know a lot about those sorts of things. I wouldn't say I'm, the world's best at it, but I definitely am engaged in those things. History, if you have anything that deals with history and you want to talk about it, I might be a person that's worth talking to. If you have anything that does with anything practical like math, do not include me or take my word for it. I have 2 kids. One of my sons is incredibly mathematical, whose brain can just wrap around it, and he apparently took after Kate or something. And I have another kid whose math skills are like mine, but when it comes to history or stories or anything like that, that's sort of more our speed. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Preparing for Sunday, where you and I take a look together, not at math, and not at math because I wouldn't be able to take a look at that with you and be of any help, but at the upcoming Sunday's scripture stories. And so this is for Sunday, December 25th, 2022, and if you definitely hear the math or the digits there, that this Sunday is Christmas Sunday. So this is Christmas Day. This is a Preparing for Christmas Day's lectionary text. We are in year A, which is a Matthew year, and where most of our readings come from Matthew. The last Sunday, the last time we gathered, we got the story from Matthew of Jesus' birth. And this week, it's Christmas Day, and Christmas Day is basically always built around the Luke narrative, no matter what year it is. Because Luke has the most detailed and the one that we most traditionally know story of Jesus' birth. So for this Sunday, the gospel is Luke chapter 2. The 1 through 7 are kind of optional because they're a rehash of the Christmas Eve text. But we're going to do 2, 1 through 20. The reading for Sunday is really 8 through 20, the continuation of the Christmas story. But we went ahead and lumped 1 through 7 in there. And to tell you the truth, this isn't just preparing for Sunday. This is also preparing for Christmas Eve, which is Saturday. And in some ways, it's also preparing even for the whole season of Christmas, which starts on Christmas Eve or day. So the text for Christmas Eve is Luke 2, 1 through 14, and that is a complete overlap with Christmas Day. Luke 2, 1 through 14, Christmas Eve. Luke 2, 1 through 20, Christmas morning. So it's a rehash and then an additional piece on the back. All right? So what this is and where this is rooted is in counting. Some of this is rooted in counting. And I told you when I began that math, counting, equations are not really my thing. So you're going to have to, if you're a mathematical person, decide if my counting or if my talking about counting here makes any sense. But I'm going to talk to you about counting for a moment. Last week in preparing for Sunday, I tried to sit together with the whole birth story as it's put together by both Matthew and Luke. The birth story of Jesus' birth there's 4 Gospels. It's only told in Matthew and Luke, and they give us different perspectives, different ideas. And I talked to you about how Matthew gives us sort of the Joseph perspective, and how Luke gives us a more Mary, intense perspective story. So the 2 of those sit next to each other. In year A, last week we had the birth of Jesus story from Matthew. On Christmas Eve, Christmas morning, what we're looking ahead together to right now, we're going to get the Luke account, all right? The Matthew story, so the Gospel according to Matthew, begins with a genealogy. A genealogy is a list of ancestors. And so Matthew begins with this, and I talked about this in the previous preparing. I'm going to try to do this quickly here. That it's a genealogy that has this sort of numerical significance. It's 14 generations from the beginning to David. It's 14 generations from David to the exile, and then it's 14 generations from the exile to Jesus, as Matthew gives us the genealogy. This is Matthew's math, and first of all, it's wrong. The genealogy is wrong. There's way more names in it than that. But it wanted to be 14, 14, 14, so that it gave us 3 sets of 14, because for people of a Jewish background, numbers aren't just math, they also tell a story. And I like the story, I don't like the math. David, in Hebrew, the way that name is written is DVD, like those old things we used to watch movies on. DVD, they do not have vowels in Hebrew, so it's DVD. There's 3 sets there, and those things, David adds up to 4, there's 3 letters, and so he's doing this storytelling math with this genealogy, and he's not even trying to be accurate. And he's trying to set Jesus in the line, in the tradition, in the messianic role that David stands in for people of Jewish faith. And so there's a lot of work that he's doing there in that genealogy. In Luke, a different kind of counting occurs. So the Matthew counting is symbolic and is a messed up genealogy. In Luke, there is the telling of a different kind of counting. Counting is part of both of these stories, and I'm terrible at math, so you get what you get here. But in Luke, the counting that it is talking about, and I know it's year A, but I'm talking about Luke because that's the text we get for Christmas Eve and Christmas morning when we gather together, even though it's year A. And Luke's counting is this census, right? So the counting that Luke embeds in the story, the math, is census-taking math. Now there is significance to this in sort of Old Testament storytelling too. The early part of the Bible has a book in it called Numbers, which makes it sound to a guy like me who doesn't like math, do I even want to read that book? But yeah, I have read it. It's actually a story, but it is about census and about counting the people of Israel as they're a growing a group of clans and turning into a nation. It's sort of the roots in how you care for all these people, how you follow the rules. It's an early account in Numbers of census, and by the time Luke rolls around, this is a perfected practice by the Empire of Rome. And so in both Matthew and Luke, it is important to remember that Jesus was born in an occupied territory. He was born to a people, as Matthew identifies it, that have a long, rich, valuable religious tradition. Judaism is a steeped, rich thing. And he's born to a people that have that, but these people are occupied by Rome, by a world superpower. And so Jesus and his family live under the occupation of, to them, people who don't understand their faith, their heritage, their roots. And the idea of counting people goes for both groups, for Jews and for Gentiles or Romans. But Luke starts by talking about this census, which we know is part of the Christmas story, and it's a type of counting, right? So this is what governments do. They count. You have been interviewed for a census. I don't remember how many census I've spoken to people about, and I don't remember when the most recent one was. I'm terrible with math and counting, but I want to say we've been within maybe a couple of years from the most recent census. I think we just went through this. Census is a thing that government does. And the question here is, in Luke, with this counting system and this census that's taking place, is governmental counting good? It's a necessary evil, but is it good? Remember, in Matthew, we get an account after Jesus' birth that Herod gets the wise men that come by, tell him that Jesus has been born, and so he gets a little afraid that the Messiah will usurp his power, will take his place. And in Matthew, we get the story that's called the slaughter of the innocents, which is a tangential to Christmas story, the death of all the firstborn babies. And this is what government does with a census. This is what empire does with a census. It's bureaucracy, it's which schools get which funding, it's which group of people get which kind of government assistance and how much. It's a necessary evil. I mean, how else do you perpetuate a nation without government, without counting? But when you're counting, you turn into a bunch of stereotypes and you turn into a big governmental machine. And so this story of counting in Luke is the story of the Messiah with a rich tradition, but fitting into a world of counters, And this is like, is this a story, or is this historical, or is this about math? What's going on right here? And sometimes what can happen here is you sort of lose the voice of the individual inside the complexity of the counting, of the government. I'm going to interrupt myself right here before you go crazy. Lutherans have a pretty powerful explanation of government and faith. And what I value this, it's a complicated explanation, but we say that there's, two kingdoms, that God rules over two kingdoms. The government is a necessary one of these kingdoms. Governing is part of it. And then there's also sort of the reign of God, that's faith and our souls, and God reigns over both of those. As Lutherans, we believe that we are planted firmly inside of both these reigns. And so governing is part of our lives. But governing is not the same as faith, and faith is not the same as governing. They're separate, they're overlapped, and we do both at once. And that's sort of the feel you get from this counting in Luke. And you can get a bit of this vibe of what counting does to people. It stereotypes people. Hey, that school district is a poorer one because we just took the census, right? And then, oh, they're poor, you don't want to go there, we want to move. Oh, but the math of property values, and so that's what, and God rules over that kingdom too, as well. But it's important to differentiate between the two kingdoms. When you're making a choice at the ballot box, that may or may not be the same as a faith choice. And this is, in America, we've conflated these two things so much that, for example, we talk about the evangelical church, where voting and going to church are so overlapped that you can't tell the difference. Lutherans, we believe our faith informs how we vote, and how we vote becomes a question that we pray about in our faith, and we're both at once, but they are not, God's church is not its own powerful political entity in and of itself. All that's a lot of complicated talk. You can Google Luther's Two Kingdoms if you're interested in that, want to read more about it. But I'm going to try to stick with this gospel. And boy, you're like, boy, it's Christmas time. Do we really have to dive into this? But this is what's going on in these texts from Matthew last week, Luke this week, and it has some math part of the history of the storytelling here. This is for Christmas Eve and Christmas morning. And the question that we ask at this time is if everything's already determined. Hey, are we stuck inside of a system that already determines and has everything set in stone? Are our days history? Are they already written? Is everything all locked in? Are we important at all? And is God able to steer us and our existence in a new way? Can God break into math, into time, into the counting of government, and do a new salvific thing for the person, for you? Or are we just part of a machine to be counted, and then if Herod needs to slaughter people to keep his power? Are we just part of a machine? Or is there some value to the individual? This is the Christmas Eve question, the crux of what's happening. And what happens in the story is God is Emmanuel, God with us. And God breaks into the story, the world of counting, and says, I'm going to make this a world of salvation about more than just counting. Counting's part of it. We have that realm that we're part of, but there's this deeper realm that we're part of simultaneously, and we're part of both. And so it's easy for me, who doesn't like math, to be like, oh, the math isn't the whole story, that really the story, the history, the humanities of it is going on too, and that's pretty cool stuff. Of course I think that because I'm not a mathematician, right? But that's the question of Christmas Eve is, are we accountants? Are we governing people? Are we part of a machine? Is everything all locked in? Is everything predetermined? Are we just such a small part of this huge machine that our lives are sort of locked in and almost meaningless? Or does God save us and hear the individual voice, and the individual voice in the midst of the counting, hear it, value it, and even empower it and use it? And you'll remember that when Mary lives in the midst of this counting, and she hears about, census, and Joseph is the census one. He's like, oh, we got to do the census, and he takes him. Mary hears about God working, and she takes time out to sing. And then in the story of Luke, it doesn't really, we have these shepherds, and they seem like they're kind of not involved in the census taking or something. We've got all these people coming to Bethlehem to be counted, and the shepherds, I guess, that already had that done and cleared out, they're almost like tangential to the count. I'm sure government doesn't mess up ever, right? So they've probably already been counted or something. But the shepherds, who we don't even know how many of them there are or what's going on, become included in the story. And so this is this sort of empire and counting and government and God working in the midst of all that we've built up like this. Ours is a God of math, of exactness, of machinery, but ours is also a God of history and story. And as Mary would tell us, God is one of stopping in the middle of both these places and doing maybe all that you can do, living in a moment in song and just being grateful and enjoying, maybe not the count, maybe not the story, but just enjoying being. And Mary does that through song. Are we a part of this big consumer machine of Christmas, or are we a part of the story of God's coming? I guess the answer to that is yes. We're both. We're in both kingdoms, and Christmas Eve is where we're told through story how God interjects God's self into a world of math and counting. And the moment that it happens really is all about the singing. Joseph is about, getting the census taken, but Mary sings, and the singing is a freedom. The singing is a possibility. It's a different sort of voice. You and I are not at Christmas time teleported out of a world of, can the businesses we work at get in the black before the end of the year? We're not teleported out of, hey, it's almost the end of 2022, so our IRS tax statements and everything come to mind. And hey, year-end stuff with and consumerism and how the government is going to count and who it's going to give its money to and should it give its money. We're all part of all that. And God promises, though, to identify us and our humanity in the midst of that machine. We have to do the machine. That's the only way for humanity to sort of keep it together. And God acknowledges that we're stuck having to do that. But then God also acknowledges you and I as individuals. And that is what Christmas is. It is the identification of such a human thing as singing. It's singing. It's not history class. It's not math class. It's choir. Incidentally, I am worse at singing than I am at math. And so this is a thing that we do together. It doesn't mean I don't enjoy music. I enjoy music even though I don't enjoy math. And so this is singing season. This is a night to just be, to appreciate what God does. It's a night to sort of, maybe take a break from the counting and the history and just sing, just be. So I don't know. If you were able to stick through all that, more power to you. I guess the gist is that you do not want me doing your math for you. And I guess the gist is math is a fact of life. It's a fact of Matthew with the genealogy, even though it's broken. It's a fact of Luke, where the empire needs the census to be taken and it dislocates people. But then God locates them even in the midst of being moved around. And when God hits, it's a song. It's not history, it's not math, it's a song. And so that's what Christmas Eve is. It's supposed to be a time out from the accounting, a time out from empire, a time out from grades and classes and all those things, and just a moment to sit back and be given joy by the Holy Spirit and by Christ's saving presence. So I tried to talk to you some about Luke, but I made it also some Matthew information injected there since we're in the year of Matthew. And more than anything, I wanted to give you a sort of behind the curtain, hey, here's the specifics of what seems to be happening in this text. And that's what I try to do in preparing for Sunday. It's a sort of Bible study. And so if you were able to stick with that, more power to you. I appreciate you joining me. I hope to see you. Our services for Christmas Eve are at 6 and 9 p.m. Our service for Sunday morning is at 9:30. One service only, Sunday morning, Christmas morning, 9:30 a.m. Please gather with us. And the gathering, the point of the gathering is to just celebrate God's love, celebrate the community that we are, celebrate, not worry, but celebrate that God gives us such a wonderful existence in such a wonderful place. Celebrate that God, through His Son, Christ, saves us. And that's what we do at Christmas. We just try to sing and celebrate it together. All right? Thanks for joining me. Stay safe. I'll see you soon.